Creation of state funds. Yeah, it's an article in today's Tampa Bay Times.
I'm going to read it.
What happened?
All this stuff going on is crazy.
Thank you. Today's meeting of the Neighborhood Affordable Housing Advisory Board is called to order. Everybody welcome. Agendas of today's meeting are on the wall at the entrance to the chambers. Please remember to turn off your cell phones. To ensure a complete record of the board's actions, we ask that each individual wishing to speak clearly state your name and spell your last name for the clerk. I'll ask the board members to introduce themselves and identify the fields they each represent.
Carmen Santiago for the people.
Robin Field, residential lending.
Lindsay Dacus Harrison, real estate.
Linda Byers, resident and advocate for affordable housing.
And I'm Kevin Chenault, the chair, and I represent the nonprofit providers of affordable housing. I'd like to recognize Gabby Camacho, who had been serving on this board for 5 years. She has accepted another position outside of the county and has had to resign. We'd like to officially thank her for her time and service in the board. She was a valuable asset to the board, and we look forward to and wish her well in her future endeavors. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes of the board's July 11th meeting. May I have a motion to approve item 2.1?
Is that the motion?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 3 on the agenda is citizens to be heard regarding items not on the agenda. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on items not on today's agenda? If so, please step to the podium, state your name, and spell your last name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak on a subject that is not on the agenda.
My name's Beth Davis, D-A-V-I-S, and I represent the Clearwater Alliance for Housing. We finally have a name, but no officers, and we're happy to be here. Those of us who can be here, as we all know, 9 a.m. on a Tuesday is not good for our working public. And I'm not going to do my speech that I did to City Council. I think I'll send it to you, but one of the things I've learned, first of all, is that housing is complicated, and the more you learn, the harder it gets, right? And you all are the experts. I'm still learning. And I asked the Clearwater Housing Authority if they could help me understand rental assistance, because I think there's $310,000 that the City of Clearwater committed to the Clearwater Housing Authority for rental assistance, and it's for security deposits. And as of the last 30 days, here we are at the end of the fiscal year, that money had still not been sent over to them. And that was a concern for me. And that may be what's on the agenda, this item. I'm not sure I understand that particular item of what needs to be sent over. But when we approve money for rental assistance, I would like you all to be asking questions to say, how quickly can people get it in their hands? And I do have a scheduled meeting with the director, the CEO, of the Clearwater Housing Authority. And so I would like to invite all of you, if you'd like to go to that meeting with me and ask more questions on how we can collaborate and get their website attached to our website so that the real renter can find help. The real renter staying in their home in this emergency seems to be critical. And I give you that. Thank you.
Kevin, if I may?
Yes.
So I believe the agreement that Ms. Davis is referring to is a tenant-based rental assistance agreement. The amount is $321,400. That contract is still in negotiation between the two parties, between us and CHA. So that we've had several iterations of it, and it is in the final stages of negotiation, so we should be able to execute it shortly. The funding for that program is not tied to a fiscal year and is funded by home.
Okay,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mohammed Abdul Rahim, ABDUR-RAHIM. I think you should probably know that by now. But anyways, good morning. I'm not going to reiterate what Beth has said, but I am also a part of the Clearwater Alliance for Housing. Spoke to you before, and basically I'm going to say the same thing because I think that citizens like myself has to be able to echo the concerns that is within their city, and especially when it comes to housing. Every one of you represent housing in some form or another, and you know how important it is. But I'm going to say the same thing I said to you before. You are the voice. The reason why citizens come to you is because you are that advisory board for the city council. And if you're not asking the tough questions, and you're not posing to the city council as to the directions they should be going, then where does that leave the citizens? So please, I advocate on behalf of the citizens to please ask the tough questions. Please encourage our city council to make housing their top priority. We're going into the budget now, and we need to actually have more money into housing because it's not going to get easier, it's going to get worse. So thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else come forward, we'll move on to the next item. Board reporter, do we have any e-comments? No. Okay, thank you. Item 4.1, it's presentation by the Executive Director of the City of Clearwater Redevelopment. There have been some changes in that position, and I welcome Ms. Sanderson.
Thank you so much. Denise Anderson, Economic Development and Housing. So unfortunately, effective yesterday, in fact, Dr. Matthews is no longer with the city. And so she's obviously not here, and such short notice, we were not able to put a pitch hitter in to deliver the message that she otherwise would have given today. So I'll present to you a couple of options to consider. We can, in a near-term meeting, have an interim staff member from the CRA come in and deliver a presentation to you all as originally intended, or we can wait until the recruitment is completed. I presume we'll have an external recruitment, which of course can take several months to get somebody in that seat and then up to speed. So it's really your pleasure, however you wish to approach that, but the intent of that presentation was to review the contents of the North Greenwood CRA in particular and discuss sort of how our departments will collaborate, coordinate to align toward meeting our mutual goals and objectives.
With suggestions presented, what is the desire of the board on this?
Denise, is there a plan in place approved by the county?
Yes, it was approved by the Board of County Commissioners at their May meeting.
Can you share that with us?
Certainly can. Yeah.
Any other thoughts? My personal opinion would be I'd rather not wait for a new person, new executive director. If we could have a qualified speaker, my personal preference would be to do that, because by the time a new director gets in, if direction changes, we're talking quite a few months, and I'd rather get the information, my personal. Does anybody on the board have any different opinion on that?
No, I agree.
So I think that would be the recommendation of the board, would be to get a qualified staffer to be able to make that presentation to us when we can.
Terrific. Thank you.
Item 4.2 is a recommendation for the City Council approval of Resolution 23-12, appointing 11 members to the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. Ms. Sanderson.
Thank you. So this is Resolution 23-12, and we bring this forward at the next council meeting, which is slated for August 17th. So this resolution, as Chairman Chenault said, is to appoint members to the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. As you all know, the 7 board members of Neighborhood and Affordable Housing Advisory Board comprises 7 of those 11 members. The resolution, as is currently written, it's stamped draft currently in your agenda packet, and that's for a very specific reason. It does, however, reserve the vacant seat vacated by Gabby in this last month. We hope to have that filled before we begin our work in September of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. Also vacant, missing in that resolution is the assignment by the Community Development Board, which is the local planning agency that must appoint a member to the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. You may recall Bruce Rector served in that capacity last year. He has agreed to participate if appointed by the Community Development Board. Gina Clayton, the Director of Planning and Development, will present that item to the CDB at their August 16th meeting. However, she cannot make a recommendation for that appointment. So while I am supposing that Bruce will likely be appointed, we really have no way of knowing what the board will choose to do. However, that appointment will be made in advance of the council's decision on August 17th. In addition, on August 14th, presumably during the work session of council, they'll discuss and come to consensus on the appointment of a local elected official. And as you know, our council member Kathleen Beckman has served in that capacity for the last couple of years. And again, I presume that she will likely be appointed by council, but staff cannot make that recommendation either. So my assumption going into the August 17th meeting is we will have some consensus from council at the August 14th meeting, and we will have the appointment from the Community Development Board at that meeting. And so 10 members will be named with that one vacancy, hopefully filled before you begin your work on September 12th. Happy to take any questions. Oh, please forgive me. I will remind you, though, once this committee is seated, August 17th, it is a Sunshine Committee, so all members that are appointed, including Councilmember Beckman and the representative from the local planning agencies, the Community Development Board, you all may not discuss with those members any items that may come before you and your duties under the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. So just wanted to remind you of that obligation. And now I'll be happy to take questions.
I just want to encourage the board and the committee members as they get appointed to read the documents, be prepared to have conversations and input into the process as we go through the process this year. It makes for a better outcome as we move forward.
I should mention, if it is your pleasure, you can, if you like, make a recommendation to council of the elected official that you wish to see on that board, and I can pass that along in my August 14th meeting. So that's, at your discretion if you wish to include that recommendation in your action item today.
So, comments or questions from the board?
I don't have any right now.
None at this time.
Do we want to make recommendations or leave it to the council on the position?
I would
Need
like
a
to
little
make a
more time,
recommendation.
maybe,
Okay.
to evaluate those that are nominated, because I'm not familiar with all of them.
I mean, I have some people in mind that I would like to recommend.
Okay. So
I'm referring to the local elected official, which would be one of our council members.
Oh.
If you'd like to make a recommendation there.
No.
Okay. Does anybody from the public wish to make a comment on this item? Seeing no one come forward, may I have a motion to approve item 4.2?
Motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further comments? All in favor? No, opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next item for business is item 4.3. Recommendation approval of State Housing Initiatives Partnership, also known as SHIP, Program Annual Report, the closeout year 2020 and 2021, and interim year 2021 and 2022. Ms. Sanderson.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a mouthful. Thank you, Denise Sanderson, Economic Development and Housing. So first of all, I'd like to apologize for not sending this to you last week. I was unexpectedly out, and quite honestly, things just kind of got out of control for me. But it did get attached to your NAHAV agenda. So if you happen to pull up that agenda since I think probably Thursday afternoon, you will have seen that in there. So perhaps you did. And it is the most poorly formatted document. So forgive the margins. This is a template that is produced by the state, and it really just prints as it prints. So it prints terribly, but it is transmitted to the state by September 15th is its due date. So I'll review the contents of this report, and we can talk through some of this. But the important thing here is this is, as you see here at the top of the screen, it is for the closeout year 2020-2021. And so what that means is we actually have 3 years to spend the funds that are either allocated or earned during that fiscal year. And during that year, you may remember, Quite possibly you do not. It was, those COVID years. But the governor vetoed the allocation that year, so we got zero allocation. We did, however, earn program income, and program income is the repayment of loans and then the interest earned on those receivables. So we had $433,000 and change come in under program income. But you'll see here this starts out with how the funds were utilized for the strategies that we have in our local housing assistance plan, and that, as you can see, is purchase assistance with rehab, owner-occupied rehab, and new construction. We produced 9 units there under those activities. When you get down here, of that $331,000 expended in those categories, we take 10% for administration. That's a standard under program income for SHIP. And so $31,000 in change supports our admin costs. So you may know that though we are funded by general fund in our budget, it is offset by the administrative costs associated with the grants that we receive and the program income associated with those. So down here, this gets to total revenue. So we had interest of $5,800, program income, or those payments received, of $427,000, and then we get to this really strange number of a negative carryover from the previous year. And this has generated a lot of discussion internally, so I wanted to take a minute and explain this, because it's a complicated concept unless you're an accountant. So, which I'm not, so we'll muddle through. But what this really means is, because we have 3 years to spend money, this money right here was actually spent for prior year activities. So for instance, 1920 closeout last year, we pulled money. Remember, so 1920, we can spend it in 1920, 2021, and 21-22. We can spend those dollars. And during that period of time, for those projects that closed out, that were initially allocated under 1920, when those projects closed out, we pulled money from one of those other year allocations. So this is actually money that came out of 2021 funds to fund a project previously reported on in a closeout year prior to. So every year you'll see this. You'll see a number here, and as you can see here, this is what you'll see next year. This is the carry forward to next year, another negative number, albeit much smaller there. But that's really what that means. So you never want to return money to the state. You never want to see that funds remain available in the closeout year, because by its very nature, you're supposed to spend all of those monies over that 3-year period. But that's what that number there is getting to. When we move down into the report, it reminds us of what those rent rates are for extremely low income, very low income, low, moderate income, then up to 140%. We don't do anything in the 120 to 140% at this time, and I don't anticipate that policy will change. But some jurisdictions do statewide, and so that's a category here that's sort of auto-filled. These are not numbers that we come up with up here. I'm not actually sure why they're in this report. But when we look at the funding sources here, again, this gets into leveraging. So that $331,000 that we expended in SHIP money, we also spent some housing trust fund program income funds that we have here. It's showing up as public monies expended, non-SHIP. The private funds, this is the private lenders, such as what Robin represents. These are the additional funds supported by other primary loans or first position loans, if you will. And then the owner contributions that are required for the total value of $603,000 is tied to this $331,000 worth of activity. Home ownership, all of our construction and rehab projects in this particular year were tied to home ownership. That's why you're seeing a duplication there of those numbers. We really just start reporting on the compliance summaries, those boxes that we check. And then a lot of this stuff, by the way, gets baked into our dashboard that you've seen. These kinds of numbers kind of populate the dashboard. Excuse me. And then, of course, we report on who did we serve, what income stratas did we serve here. And that 93% surprisingly, I mean, you kind of would expect it to say 90 because 10% is admin, but it totals up to 93%. So, and that's because of, I should say, project delivery costs and other things that come out of admin, perhaps. Then we get into the units, the mortgages, loans, down payment loans, etc. Total number of units produced. In this case, it was 9 during that year. I should mention in 2020, 2021, that was also the year that we had the CRF funds, which were passed through under the CARES Act from the feds through the state to us. So we suspended our rehab program during that time at the height of COVID. A lot of things were shut down. The market was quite unstable, as you know. And so a lot of the activities were suspended or very low volume as a result. However, we did, staff was not bored that year. We had the CRF funds and delivered rent, mortgage, and utility assistance. And in fact, we exceeded our initial allocation and drew down additional funds that year from CRF in order to support those activities. But it's not reflected here in this report. So. And then we get into owner-occupied rehabs and new construction and purchase assistance with rehabs. And of course, you report on all sorts of things like the characteristics, family size, race, head of household, and demographics. All of this is tracked, as you can see. These might look a little familiar, so it's timely that we're discussing this today. These are the incentive strategies that we'll be discussing during our work under the AHAC. So expedited permitting, ongoing review, etc. These are all those topics that we explore. Are these strategies working for us? And this is really just a reminder to the state of what strategies we have in place, when those were approved or adopted into our local housing assistance plan. And then we provide a narrative of the other support services that the city provides, not necessarily funded by SHIP. In fact, most of these are funded by our CDBG Public Services. This is reported to SHIP as well. They want to know what else are we doing to support low to moderate income persons, including homeless persons in our community. And they like to hear a success story. So this is one that Terry, our SHIP administrator, pulled regarding Mr. Michael Taylor. A nice little warm story for us that we get to share with the state. I'm not sure why they pull this, why they request this kind of information. Maybe they post it to their website, don't really know, but it's nice to be able to share success stories with them. So I think this is an incredibly impressive number here. We have very few foreclosures. So I think a lot of people don't realize that we are in fact like a bank. We do have collections, and we are very good at collecting funds. When we're unable to collect funds, we do work out plans and we recast notes when appropriate. Very few defaults and very few foreclosures. In fact, right here's the percentage default rate, 0.51, less than 1%. And then, of course, we identify by name those persons and their address, which I won't linger on here because it's unfortunate that we have to include it, but it is part of record. And then how we broke down administration costs. So Nova Engineering is and Rock Solid, we're no longer doing business with Rock Solid. Am I correct, Chuck? No longer, I think we're done.
Chuck Lane, Economic Development Housing. We use Rock Solid for down payment assistance loans only.
Okay, so they're still doing work with us?
Yes.
Okay, forgive me. And Nova Engineering. So Nova Engineering does a lot of work with us. They are our contract company that goes out and does site inspections. They do pre-bid evaluations, and they go out during the construction process to really ensure that that contractor is doing the work for which they were contracted, and they sign off on completeness of projects, so to certify that we can pay those contractors.
Does Nova do your down payment assistance inspections as well, the HQS?
No, I think, is that Rock Solid that does that?
Rock Solid, for down payment assistance, they're doing our home inspections.
Okay.
And then, again, this is just sort of a restatement of program income, how it came to us, loan repayment, refinance, foreclosure, sale of property. So many of our loans are deferred for the life of the loan, but if a sale of property occurs during that period of time in which a lien exists, they're obligated to repay those funds. And the reason for that is our mission is to create and preserve affordable housing. So when we have a sale of property that is no longer going to be for affordable housing, we collect a repayment so that we can recirculate those funds in the initial, for the original intent and purpose for which we provided those. And then rental developments, Pinellas County Housing Authority, this is Norton Apartments. So they are doing, in fact, we just issued this this year, a great example, so this year, and yet they're being reported in the closeout year for 2021. They are doing a rehab of Norton Apartments off of MLK right now. And then, of course, we track special needs. How do we do there? And then interim year data. So this is actually for 21-22 data. We used to report 2 years of interim data. So we used to report interim, it would be 21-22 and 22-23. The state no longer requires or desires to see interim year 2 data. So this is just simply 21-22. This is our works in progress, if you will. So the distribution for that year was $806,000. The program income was over $1 million. We've expended $825,000, encumbered another $952 and change, almost $953. The administrative expense that we have currently pulled from that is $98,000 with encumbered administration of $34,000. And then we have all these buckets to fill. And we've kind of referenced these from time to time. So SHIP is not as complex as federal money, thankfully, but it is complex in that we're required to be able to hit certain targets. So at least 65% have to be used for home ownership, at least 75% has to be used for construction and rehab, 30% for VERI and ELI income levels, 30% for low income, 20% for special needs. So it's always a bit of a dance and sometimes a struggle to figure out where to allocate these funds in order to make sure that we hit these requirements. But as you can see here, we're doing quite well in meeting all of those. We do not calculate carry forward to next year in this respect, but we're on track for next year to do pretty well in meeting our requirements there. So we'll see more next year on this data. Happy to take any questions. This SHIP annual report, I hope that it goes to council on August 17th. There is a chance that it moves to the September 7th meeting, just simply because of timing, but it is due to the state by September 15th. Take any questions I have.
Any questions from the board?
Denise, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You have interest income. Are there interest-bearing notes that you collect on your programs?
We do, not a lot anymore in the current market. Most of ours is not amortizing, some deferred for life of loan, some deferred for 5 years, some will defer and then forgive portions thereof. So right now, I don't think we have any amortizing loans going out, am I correct?
I don't believe, well, I think she's asking about interest-free loans or interest-bearing loans?
You reported interest income, and I was just curious as to where that interest income
Yeah, I don't think we have we're not writing any loans currently with interest, unless it's to a developer. Those might carry some, although that's pretty unusual right now as well. But certainly previously, under different market conditions, we did. So usually under 3%, and it depended upon the income strata or the debt-to-income ratios, those kinds of things, but always very low or no interest.
You have a very low default rate, but do you have provision within your note to collect default interest if there's a default?
We do sometimes, depending on the homeowner that we may have served. Certainly within our development agreement, with the developers We often bake that into those, indeed.
Private leveraging.
Yes.
I'm interested in that because that was a pretty high figure, like at 259, I think. And I want everyone to know how important it is to incorporate lenders who provide grants, as an example. Or you've got Hometown Heroes and Florida Housing Finance funding, and you've got Selena's House in Tampa that can offer down payment, and leveraging and layering all of those different programs. I'm not sure the public is totally aware of all that's available to them and all the partnerships that we have.
I'm sure you're correct.
Yeah.
But we will be talking a little bit about Hometown Heroes when we talk about the Live Local Act today.
I saw that in your agenda.
We'll talk a little bit about that, some very significant changes with that program.
And then one other thing that caught my attention was the city's incentives, one of which is ADUs, and I was curious as to what that initiative curtails. It is new construction of affordable tenant-based housing under that ADU initiative.
Yeah, so we're currently going through a comprehensive plan amendment process. We allow ADUs currently. Our greatest challenge with ADUs is typically in the neighborhoods in which those would likely occur, we have very, very small lots. And we have very narrow streets. And so parking is a very significant concern because by code, we don't allow you to park on lawns, we don't allow you to park just on street overnight, those kinds of things. So we need to address parking, and that's a really significant challenge when you start adding in the ADU component because, of course, you're adding cars. Right. So it's a challenge that I know Planning and Development is working through. We're going to be talking about it for certain during the AHAC process because it's a big component of what Planning and Development is doing in terms of incentive strategies. So I would beg your indulgence to allow that conversation to occur with that broader group because it's always a really interesting discussion that we have when Gina's present and talking about some of the things that they're working on to address these challenges.
And if that, if that were to occur, then would you entertain a motion to provide that funding through the SHIP program?
Yeah, I don't know if it would be appropriate today to make that recommendation. I think it would be appropriate in our incentive strategies to address that there, because that, of course, is part of the SHIP, the Local Housing Assistance Plan, and tied to the SHIP funding. So make yourself a mental note or handwritten note to be sure to bring that up during that discussion, because it certainly should get baked into that conversation.
And I have one other question regarding your partnerships with your not-for-profits, one of which is Shore Services. Mm-hmm. Are they still operating?
I think in this last year. I think they operated last year, and this year that we just closed out, I think they had some funding, or no?
They were going to close up last year. They had some retirement, and they opted to stick around for another year, and we funded them. I don't know what's going to happen moving forward. It's unfortunate because it's a really good program.
It is an excellent program.
Yeah, it really is.
Are they still with Pinellas Opportunity Council?
They are.
Okay.
Yeah, and they did not come forward under our public services program this year, unfortunately, so we don't have an opportunity to fund them under CDBG. Okay. Yeah, agreed. It's a hole right now, I think, in service.
Especially with your rehab program.
Pardon me?
Especially when you're using your rehab program.
Right.
Yeah.
When folks need assistance in clearing junk and debris or whatever from their properties, they were really good about that.
Yeah, agreed.
So,
Never enough funds for them either. We always, if we had underperforming public service clients, we would put more money toward them quite often and to Gulf Coast Legal Services because they can spend every dime we could provide.
Yeah.
So back to your interest question.
Yes.
In the last 7 years since we've been in this role, we have not written a interest-bearing loan, right? But we do have provisions. We have a default rate. If someone falls into default, they can kick into an interest payment. If we have someone an heir takes on a house and the affordability period is over, but they still owe money, we can negotiate an interest-bearing loan in that situation. So there are few and far betweens where we charge interest on our loans.
On that program, when there's a death and you've got an heir situation, which is a big issue now statewide, the heirs, do you allow assumption of your loan by an eligible heir that may maintain?
And that's what I was just referring to, an assumption
Gotcha.
with someone that maybe isn't homesteading the property or doesn't qualify, but the affordability period's over, so those rules are no longer applicable. We can freely negotiate, a loan
Excellent.
to that
Okay.
person to make it work.
That's good.
Any others? Ms. Sanderson, I've got one question, comment, whatever you want to call it, that actually leads into two.
Noted, caveat.
Congratulations on the low foreclosure rate.
Yeah.
What I'd like, and I would be, do you study or find out causes of foreclosures and whether it's income-based or things like that? And then the second comment question is clarification. I know when they qualify, their income levels are required, but you listed the income level for the foreclosures. Is that the income level they're at when they were foreclosed on, or does that get tracked upon?
It does not.
Okay.
So we don't try to penalize anybody for income growth or decline. So foreclosures, one of the reasons why we have such a very, very low foreclosure rate is because we are very aggressive at trying to recast notes if we need to. And we also, you all probably don't remember this was several years ago. We brought forward a foreclosure policy. We had never had one, actually. And we came to realize there are just some people that would choose not to pay the notes. There are some people, unfortunately, and I get it, everybody's got pressures on them to pay notes, but because the government provided it, perhaps I don't need to repay it. And while I can certainly empathize with financial challenges that folks have, we do have that mission to create and preserve affordable housing and to ensure that we're properly funding those that can afford, that show evidence of being able to afford to repay. And so in those very rare occasions where we have someone who refuses to pay or is no longer able, we do have a very lengthy process that leads up to notice of foreclosure. And I think even in our last one, we had started foreclosure proceedings and the homeowner opted to sell the home. And in a buyer's market, she was certainly able to get out of that situation with both the primary lender and with us, put some money in her pocket, and move on to other housing options. So we avoided foreclosure in that respect, but we did begin legal action, and that, I think, prompted the sale of the home. So it's very rare. In this current marketplace, I think more folks would choose to just do what this homeowner did and sell the home in order to prevent a foreclosure situation. In other markets, we've just simply had collapses of income within a household or what have you, or death of a spouse or something where loss of income has occurred. And we work very, very hard to recast that note to the extent practicable.
In that foreclosure process and policy, I don't remember it completely. Is there an opportunity for staff to make recommendations for funding, counseling, something to help them change their situation?
Yeah, that's part of that process, so that's available to them. So that's part of the process for them to be able to get assistance. More often than not, what we find ourselves doing is forgiving portions of notes, recasting, extending term. If it was one of those interest-bearing notes from years and years ago, we'll lower or eliminate that interest. We'll do a renewed income analysis to try to make certain that we're keeping debt-to-income ratios appropriate. And so it's a rather involved process. While I'm certain that banks sometimes do these activities as well, I think we're far more liberal in trying to get to a resolution that protects that homeowner and keeps someone in a home. It's never our desire to foreclose and to have to take that action.
Thank you.
Denise, you mentioned people selling their homes in a high market? Are you experiencing a lot of program income from sales?
Not a lot. Let's see, let me scroll up to here. So I presume that that may have been what occurred in here. Oops, sorry.
It's not even so much sale, it's refinance. If we're a second loan and someone wants to refinance, and a lot of people have because the rates were so low a couple of years back, not so much anymore. But, you know, we're not going to go behind a refinance, so they have to pay us off to do that.
Yeah, so right here, we did have this particular year, we had a high sale of property figure that generated about half of that program income.
I'm curious as to why that was back, that was in COVID years, why people were, well, like you say, they may have been refinancing at low interest rates at that time with 2% and 3%, so that could.
Sure, and they were just bundling it all together, taking the equity.
Right, exactly.
I think a lot of us were doing those things.
Any other comments or questions from the board? Comment from the public?
I have one question. This is SHIP money, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So, when I read the SHIP possibility, rental assistance is part of it. And so rental assistance, unless I missed it, is not in this recap. Is that new, like in 2023? Or do we have a plan for rental assistance in the SHIP program today going forward?
Want to take that, Jeff?
Yeah, home is probably a better funding source for rental assistance. Here's why. We have a requirement to spend 65% of our funds on home ownership. Another requirement to spend 75% of our funds on construction and refinance. So it's just not a real good match for that. There are other funds that we can use. Home is one of them. It's very difficult because we can't manage that program internally. It's very staff intensive. When we managed the CRF money that Denise mentioned a moment ago, that was about a 6-month program. We dedicated our entire staff to that effort, as well as 5 additional staffers from the library who joined us.
Is there a nonprofit that does rental assistance that we would consider giving?
Ms. Davis? Oh, so sorry, I just started the microphone.
Is there a nonprofit that does that job well that we should be talking about giving money to?
Yeah.
Rental assistance.
And it's possible, and we've, as you know, and you mentioned, we're working with the CHA, the Clearwater Housing Authority, to get that money out the door. That's really for their clients that are awaiting, a voucher home. There's a delay in a lot of that. There's a pipeline, so that's going to help them. But yes, we can look with other nonprofits. I don't know that a lot have done it successfully. It is just so staff intensive.
Some of you may know that.
So,
Okay. Thank you.
yeah.
Anybody else from the public? Seeing no one else come forward, may I have a motion to approve item 4.3 on the agenda?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item 4.4 on the agenda is to review key provisions of SB 102, the Live Local Act. Ms. Sanderson.
So this is a cheat for me. I'm going to beg your indulgence and forgiveness as we move into this. And the reason for that is Florida Housing Coalition did a much better job explaining the Live Local Act and a couple of other things than I could ever do myself. So we're going to cheat, and I'm going to go through the Live Local Act slides. I'll try not to linger on any of them for any great deal of time. I'll try to answer questions that you may have, but I will say I am not an expert on this. And one of the great challenges is, like many things that our legislators do, they put rules in place and then you have to figure out how to implement them. And we're still in the figuring out how to implement. But we have great folks like those at Florida Housing Coalition that help us interpret things. So I'm going to start with a primer here because I'm presuming that a lot of folks who may view this tape or are sitting here behind me or watching from home today really don't understand, or I should say don't know, where the funding for all this stuff comes from. And this really starts with the Sadowski Trust Funds that were The Sadowski Act was in the early 90s, and it, as you can see, established in 92. And it created two trust funds, the State Housing Trust Fund, which is the sale program primarily, oops, forgive me, and this local government housing trust fund, which is our SHIP money. So this is the entitlement allocation that we can control. The sale program is the state apartment incentive loan program that developers pursue. So the Sadowski trust funds, these are doc stamps and the like. That's what funds the trust funds. And they have historically been swept over the years for various other activities, whether it's to respond to situations like Hurricane Michael years ago, they were swept for that purpose, whether it was the Parkland shooting, it was to harden schools one year, or whether it was some other priority of the state at the time. And as I mentioned earlier, in 2020, 2021, the governor vetoed the allocation because they were understandably uncertain of what would be going on in the economy and wanted to hold back some funds in case they were needed for other purposes. So that's the Sadowski trust funds. But really importantly, and it's one of the reasons why we're now seeing 20% increase as an example, you can no longer sweep these trust funds. However, I think it's 1/3 are forever protected. It doesn't mean we're getting all of the trust funds. They just took an act that says, well, we'll take these, but we'll never take that. But it still has resulted in very significant increases for us, and it's one of the reasons why we requested an additional FTE for next fiscal year. Is more and more money is coming to us, and of course regulations very rarely get lightened. So no more sweeps. And then we get to the Live Local Act, and this is really sweeping legislation. It preempts locals on some very significant decision-making. So it provides, I'm sure our elected officials are thrilled to hear that on the one hand, it encourages private investment in affordable housing. It also takes ad valorem out of the pockets, and then we'll have to try to figure out what we do with that, right? So, but it really is intended to encourage the private sector to step up and participate in the affordable housing opportunities that are provided here. And it encourages local governments to figure out how to work well within that new environment. So I'll draw your attention to this column right here, because this is this next fiscal year, current fiscal year actually, because we're July 1 fiscal start, right? So with state. 21-22, look where this was. And now with SHIP, this is where it is. Pretty significant increase over last year, but 20% increase this year. Sale, even bigger, right? This is that pot of money that developers go after for low interest financing for apartment construction. Huge increase. Math is what, 5x? Close to 5x there. Hometown Heroes, we'll talk about this for a second. This moved it from state housing trust funds last year into general revenue. So really just pulled it out of the Sadowski trust funds and funded it differently, which is nice because it frees up more money for the locals through the SHIP program. And then inflation response, etc. So $811 million versus $512 last year versus $209 in 21-22. So the state is making very, very significant commitments to affordable housing through a number of programs. So Hometown Heroes, Ms. Byers mentioned this earlier, the very significant shift here is that now, initially, you may recall, Hometown Heroes was intended for first responders, teachers, etc., those essential workers that were asked to continue to work through the COVID period. Now, any full-time employee of a Florida-based company, if you have a brick-and-mortar facility and you are a full-time employee of one of those facilities, you are potentially eligible to receive up to $35,000 under the Hometown Heroes program. This is administered by local banks. It is not administered by our office. The income limit is 150% of AMI. So at the time of this, it was $123,000 for a household of 4 in Pinellas County. That's pretty significant.
So you know it's now 130 and change.
Thank you. I knew it had gone up since this was printed. Yeah, they released new numbers. I just didn't want to mess with Sean's PowerPoint. So, you do the math there. That a lot of households can qualify for this. So to your point, are people aware of this? Are they taking advantage of this? Now, I would suggest that probably a lot of folks are staying out of the real estate market right now for other reasons. But when they choose to get in that, if interest rates stabilize, if insurance is stabilized, and people, really begin to dive into real estate again as a sound investment for their home, that this program can go a very long way to supporting them in that effort. So, great change there. Let's see if I'll do this, yeah. So, $150 million for the sale program. I won't really spend any time on this other than, as it says here, 70% has to be for rehab or new construction, et cetera, urban infill, mixed use, and then housing near military installations. So, we don't see a lot of those military installations within the city of Clearwater, but that's what the sale program is geared for. And then the maximum, that 30% of those projects are for use of public lands, et cetera. So, and again, that's really the message for developers. And then we get into these automatic property tax exemptions. So land owned entirely by a nonprofit, at least for 99 years. So this could be Bright Community Trust. This could be Housing Trust Fund, Pinellas County Housing Trust Fund, et cetera. For up to moderate income households, so 80% AMI. Automatically property tax exempt. Newly constructed multifamily developments have to be over 70 affordable units. So you can see there, so 80 to 120, you get an automatic 75% exemption. Under 80, you get 100%. So those are very significant when you start to build your pro forma. It certainly was a concern when we were talking about 306 South Washington, and I'll have an update on that in a little bit under my director's report, but it was a significant concern when they started penciling those numbers. So we have a local option here. We've not brought this to council for consideration because we haven't had any projects come forward under this, but we have the opportunity for council to consider a local property tax exemption. The interesting thing about this is the exemption, as you can see in that last line, if the city were to choose to authorize this, it expires before the 4th of January 1 after adoption, unless it's renewed. So this is not a guarantee to a developer that they will get this exemption long term, but it will get that developer probably through stabilization. Could be very, very helpful to them as they consider their cash flow needs. So it may be something that we bring forward to council for consideration when we have a project for which that's appropriate. So right there, key analysis, the effect on revenue collections and budgets, not only for the city and what that impact will be on the ad valorem, but certainly for the developer as well. And then publicly owned land. So we have an affordable housing inventory list, and we update it annually. Live Local Act requires that we update it this year by October 1, so we'll be bringing that forward in September for consideration. We're currently reviewing it, but the Live Local Act has some other provisions that sort of broadens the scope of those properties that we evaluate. So this is city and CRA-owned properties that we must consider for appropriateness for affordable housing. But because some of the changes baked into the Live Local Act, we might also consider some commercially zoned properties or perhaps industrially zoned properties that might be appropriate. There are other considerations that we'll be looking at when looking at that broad group of properties, because we certainly don't wish to build affordable housing in a brownfield, or I should say next to a brownfield, or a heavy industrial, or some of those other things. You don't want to create an environmental justice situation simply because you have a piece of property that you can build upon. But so there's certainly other considerations we would take, we would look at when considering recommendations for affordable housing. But because of the Live Local Act, we do need to look more broadly than we have previously, which is why the state is requiring we do so by October 1. So as I said, city and CRA properties. We have to post this online. Our affordable housing inventory list is currently online, although most of the 8 properties identified on there have been either encumbered or sold. In some cases, construction is complete on those properties. So we're certainly due for updating of that, regardless of what the state is requiring here. And then partnerships. So, Linda, you mentioned this. We live and die by these partnerships. So when we look at money, I think what can be so frustrating for folks is that, we talk about all this money that we have and that we have to spend, right? But the sad reality is it's costing about $300,000 per unit produced. So, if we have, $1 million or $10 million, do the math, we cannot do this without leveraging private investment and other public funds that may be available. Developers who pursue the sale program and other things. So it is a layering of different funding types, a very delicate dance, if you will. There's often multiple government entities negotiating with each other to ensure that we're not over-subsidizing or under-subsidizing projects, and there's a heavy bit of analysis that goes into those subsidies to ensure that we're delivering an ROI that's appropriate for the funds that we've been obligated to spend. And then, by the way, hitting all those buckets that we talked about earlier, too. So it is, and Ms. Davis said it very well, the more you understand, the more complicated it gets. That's truer words have probably never been spoken, particularly in this day and age as things are constantly changing in the marketplace. But we do work hand in glove with our partners out there because we have to. It's necessary in order to get these projects done. It's a very important component for the developers because otherwise these deals, as I said, just don't pencil out without public investment. But negotiating that public investment can be very, very challenging. Community land trusts. Number 9 here is Bright Community Trust. They've not been very active with us for quite some time, so we're hoping that they'll gear up and they'll find some opportunities that we can invest in. We haven't done any projects with them in the last couple of years, to my knowledge, but certainly want to mention that they are community land trusts that can take advantage of these incentives. This gets to that commercial, industrial, mixed-use stuff that I mentioned. So this is kind of interesting. So if the rental project is multifamily or mixed use in any area zone, commercial, industrial, mixed use, at least 40% of those units are affordable for households up to 120% for at least 30 years. And if mixed use, at least 65% is residential. Then we have to allow to build multifamily or mixed use in a commercial area without a zoning or land use change. So at the staff level, it doesn't go before Community Development Board or Council, for instance. It can be approved at the staff level. And you must allow for the highest density on any land in the city or county where residential development is allowed. So when you think of our downtown core and the density we have here versus those area neighborhoods, imagine that kind of density in those neighborhoods. So the unintended consequences of really good idea may not be well received, quite possibly, if we really were to approve densities at that downtown core level because it's technically allowed under the Live Local Act, right? So there are some inherent challenges with really good ideas. The purpose and intent was to encourage private sector development, but I suspect that we'll have a lot of NIMBYism when we start seeing projects towering over us near our single-family neighborhoods. And that gets to height. So the highest currently allowed height for a commercial or residential development within 1 mile of the proposed development, or 3 stories, whichever is higher, right? So any single-family neighborhood can accommodate at least 3 stories, but it could go very, very high. So This is an important one to see if this changes over time, particularly for built-out communities such as ours, because this poses a significant challenge. So it will be interesting to see what the legislature does over time, if they make modifications or adjustments to this that provide local control again. But these are very significant provisions that I know planning and development is sort of working through. Like, how do we implement this? It'll also be consistent with our comprehensive plan and our current zoning, right? So, nicely, all other state and local laws apply, setbacks and all of those other things. And honestly, setbacks, parking concurrency, all of those things, so that's actually going to limit some of these density allowances here. So thankfully, the state did not preempt us on this, but it sort of sets up a conflict, right, between what is intended and what is still allowed to be considered. I was very pleased that Ashan in his creation of this PowerPoint used some imagery that we produced for the US 19 corridor showing development potential around Baycare Ballpark. Here, we would love to see affordable housing if this area around Baycare Ballpark is to be developed such as that. I mean, this is concept. It's not for any particular project that we're considering now. It's just some visioning exercise that we did. But it does allow affordable housing developments in commercial and industrial zones, as I stated, and allows for maximizing the potential of larger scale developments when there's an affordable housing component. So we're actually doing this now, the future land use map, zoning codes, height, density, all those other things, part of our comprehensive plan process currently. We're in the middle of that anyway, so it's, I guess, timely in that regard. And then I don't know that the calculation has been done for how much land is eligible. So there's certain provisions. If you have so much industrial commercial lands as a percentage of your lands within your community, then certain provisions sort of grab hold in there. We're doing that analysis currently. And then, best practices. And so they provide some examples of what we might consider as best practices. These are some of the things that I know Gina is looking through right now as we kind of tighten up that comp plan process. Here are some examples, too, of proposed regulatory toolkits. This was part of the Housing Action Plan recommendations from Ashan. Some of this is specific to Live Local, some of it is not, and I won't linger here. We kind of do this already, the expediting permitting procedures online, that's already posted in our affordable housing stuff. It precludes state funding for housing to local governments whose comp plans are not in compliance. We're working on ours in order to be compliant. And then sales tax refunds on affordable housing subject to agreements with Florida Housing Finance, et cetera, et cetera. So the Housing Summit was a collaboration with Fort Pinellas, Pinellas County, et cetera. And this gets to some corridor planning that we're currently doing with Fort Pinellas on the Alt US 19 Missouri Avenue South, where it abuts Court. That area south down to St. Pete, that we're kind of looking at that as sort of a Sunrunner Light route. That's what that Alt 19 plan is that we're currently reviewing. I'm doing some, I'm not a planner, but I'm pretending to be one in this effort with Fort Pinellas in our planning and development department. So that's what that's referring to there, is densifying those corridors where we're likely to see or desire to see transit and over time bus rapid transit. And in fact, that's what that's speaking to there. I'm going to skip to, I guess, the end. Any questions that we can talk through as it relates to affordable housing stuff and the activities associated with the local?
I just wanted to comment on the Hometown Heroes. I know we just received, people definitely are taking advantage of it, even in the market. They have about 3 weeks probably now or less of funds available.
While Denise was speaking, there's 36 of the $100 million that started on July 3rd. There's $36 million left.
Oh, my goodness, oh, wow, that's wonderful.
Well, no, it's not. It is.
It is, but it's almost gone. It will
It's
be
almost
gone in
gone.
the
It'll be
next,
gone
like,
before
3
the end of the
weeks.
month.
Yeah.
Really, wow, that's,
And the original $100 million from last fiscal year, lasted from July 1st, 2022 through June 9th, 2023. So it was just over 11 months. This is going to last less than 2 months.
wow. So everything I said about people not taking advantage of, strike that from the record.
Yeah.
I actually wrote a note while she was speaking.
Yeah, I figured, I was like,
That's
she didn't interject, I
amazing.
thought you did.
Amazing. Do you all know, before they modified to allow any Florida-based brick-and-mortar business, what kind of spend we're
Yeah,
all seeing?
so I was at, a month ago, I was at a conference for the Florida Association of Local Housing Finance Authorities. And there was a presentation about the Hometown Heroes program. And what they said was for that, so they're calling it Hometown Heroes 1.0, which was last year's. This year is Hometown Heroes 2.0. So for Hometown Heroes 1.0, the average loan mortgage was just under $300,000, so the average amount of assistance was just, just under $15,000. That was the first year.
Wow.
And the maximum someone could get was $25,000. This year, when they made that presentation, it was literally a week into the Hometown Heroes 2.0, and the average loan size was about $315,000, so it only had, it was still around the same, and the average assistance was just over $15,000. So although the maximum amount someone could get went up to $35,000, you're still in that $300,000 loan amount, $15,000 assistance.
Yeah.
And it's just because at first, our first thought was because there was that pent-up need for that 3 weeks that it wasn't available, that maybe that's why that first week went like gangbusters, but obviously it hasn't stopped. So it offers lower interest rates generally than the market, and you get, give or take $15,000 in assistance. So, yeah.
Very significant.
Yes.
Those are the kinds of things that get you through, over the goal line for so many homeowners in a very difficult market.
Yes. And yes, and you're right, though, and Linda said it as well, there are lenders who will leverage it with the City of Clearwater assistance, or the City of St. Petersburg assistance, or the Pinellas County assistance.
Sure, we'll take third position behind.
Absolutely, yeah. And then there are other grants that you can put on top of it. So, yeah.
Other comments, questions from the board on the Live Local Act? Anyone from the public wish to comment on this item?
Yes, but it's you all, because you bring an expertise of what you know where people can find help. And so I would ask you, as board members, to look at our website, My Clearwater, and give suggestions that would teach us how to have a better resource guide on the nonprofits that you work with or know about that would enhance our own residents finding help. The website, they keep updating all the time. Denise and your team, thank you. It's got, the website team is excellent, but whatever we can do to continue to make our website as friendly as possible and as helpful for the residents looking for help. And you may know some organizations and links that could be on our lead page, and that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to ask Denise, Mohammed Ibrahim. Just want to ask Denise a clarification. You had indicated in the LIVES Act that it's no longer the town heroes like, our firefighters. There was something else you clarified, that there's another category. Could you please explain that again?
Sure. So they expanded the eligibility for Hometown Heroes to include any full-time employee of any brick and mortar business.
When you say brick and mortar, what do you?
So you can't be a remote worker, working
Okay.
out of your home, working for a company
residence.
located in New York State, as an example. It must be a business that has a brick and mortar facility.
Okay.
You must be a full-time employee of that. Now, you can still be a remote worker, but your employer must be based in Florida.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification.
You're very welcome.
And full-time employee means you must work at least 35 hours.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no one else coming forward, I'll close public comment period. And since this is informal, informational only, we'll move on to item 5, old business. Do we have any old business, Ms. Anderson?
No, we do not.
And with that, we'll move on to the director's report. Do you have anything additional to report, Ms. Anderson?
It is your lucky day. I have lots of stuff. So firstly, I'd like to welcome back Chuck. Chuck Lane, back to his role as Assistant Director. He is, of course, overseeing the Affordable Housing Division. So he's had the luxury of sitting here today, no pressure, just enjoying this wonderful conversation, chiming in if he feels like it. But next month, he'll be taking the seat, presumably, right there. And I'll have the luxury of just hanging out and chiming in when I feel like it. So welcome back, Chuck. Second, last month I talked about bringing forward an item related to 306 South Washington, a home loan for $1.763 million. And it didn't come forward on your agenda. So the reason for that is, honestly, insurance changes. Like, this is a kitchen table discussion that a lot of folks are having, whether they own a home or they're a renter and their rent's gone up, and in some cases because of insurance changes that property owner is facing. So very significant, sometimes doubling or more of insurance. Well, it's hitting these developers as well. So new quotes for insurance were provided, and you have to go through and reset your pro formas to address all of those things. So another shift in interest rates, all of those things require that further analysis is conducted, can't quite get to the finish line, you have to redo your pro forma, and that delay then causes us to go back, or causes the developer to go back and reconfirm contractor pricing. So it's this vicious cycle that we're dealing with. The good news is we're continuing to march forward, we're getting closer and closer to that finish line. I'm hopeful that we can bring it forward in September. It really just means, that timing will be dictated by when the bond underwriting is done. Tax-exempt bonds are going to be floated for this project as well. CRA is a very big contributor. This project is located in downtown CRA, the downtown gateway area. They are a very big contributor to this project. So this $1.763 million is, I don't want to say a pittance because it's not, but the CRA is, they are selling the land at $3.8 million to the Housing Trust Fund, and then reinvesting the proceeds from that sale back into the project. They're also contributing to the construction. This project will have structured parking. They're contributing $800,000, I believe, toward the construction of some public parking spaces. This project was a former Clearwater auto salvage site many, many years ago. It was a very significant brownfield project for us. It did receive from Department of Environmental Protection a site rehab completion order. However, when developer was out doing some testing on the site, soil testing and the like, really to check how we construct, interestingly found a concrete vault that was previously undetected. So there's some additional work that needs to be done in site prep, so CRA is contributing those funds, and then they're contributing funds for pre-construction costs. So somewhere in the neighborhood of nearly $5 million ultimately out of the CRA, plus the 1.763. And one of the big reasons for this very, very large subsidy on this project is that it's 173 units, as I mentioned, so it's a big project, but it is workforce housing primarily, that 80 to 120%. And that 80 to 120% AMI means it's no longer eligible for low-income housing tax credit program, which is a big funder. It is how tax assessments are done on property is different, so perhaps they'll be able to take advantage of some tax exemptions there. But some of the things that don't exist in the 80% arena drive up the cost in this 80 to 120. And most of these units are within that income strata, though some are below that 80% mark. But as I said, structured parking is a part of this, and that is a big expense. But because the goal for the city in this area is to have a more urbanized development pattern, the developer is including that in this project, but it does require public subsidy. County is a participant as well, not only in the Housing Trust Fund, but some other sources of funding that they'll be bringing. So getting to this layered thing, a lot of players in this. Peter Leach, unlike some of the other projects that they've done under the Southport banner, Peter is just the developer on this project. As I mentioned previously, I think Clearwater Housing Authority will be the owner-operator of the facility once constructed. So we're marching toward a finish line, but that's why the delay, quite honestly, is because insurance is the most recent reason. Next.
Denise, is
Yes,
this
ma'am.
a rent-restricted project?
It is
Okay.
all rent restricted. All 120% or below. I think only about 18 units, 20 units, I've forgotten the number at this point, are below 80.
Was there any density bonus in it?
I don't know that he needed one on this project. I don't think he needed the density bonus.
I can't remember, early on, it was less than 5 units. The numbers have fluctuated. I can't remember if they need the bonus or not. If they do, it won't be problematic at all.
Yeah.
One of the things I might add, we're required with a home subsidy to do a home subsidy analysis.
Thank you.
So it's a pretty deep dive with a project like this. Those performers are pretty complicated. We've hired a consultant who's a skilled underwriter that's going to really do a deep dive and evaluate this. And this, hopefully, the results are something that helps us find a way to move forward. So
You said it was a brownfield project, and it was cleaned up?
Years and years ago, the site rehab completion order was received before my time here. I want to say early 2000s.
Was that funded through brownfields for the city?
Yeah, it was our biggest project.
Was it?
Yeah.
Was it a loan program?
I think so. I think I have to beg ignorance here, because Diane Hufford, who left us, retired several years ago, that was her baby, and I know she received some awards around the state as a result of those efforts. It was a huge cleanup. It was an auto salvage yard, so you can imagine the metals and other contaminants.
I remember that, because we were doing brownfields when I was with Clearwater, and they did the cleanup program.
Yeah.
It was the first in the country to do the cleanup program under brownfields with a loan.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
That was a great deal.
Yeah. Yes, Diane Hufford is a hero around the state of Florida. So yes, so it was a surprise to find a concrete vault. We presume that it's empty. You don't really know what's in it, but obviously it will need to be removed prior to any construction. So.
Interesting.
I also mentioned in July proposed changes to the CDBG facade loan to grant program, and because this program didn't actually require council action, I'm not bringing it forward as a recommendation for you all. Really, this is informational only. We did make changes to that program. So previously, the program provided up to $35,000 as a loan to grant for business owners, but also required that they contributed no less than 20% investment in their project. So for a $35,000 loan, we'd have to have $7,000 in private investment, not necessarily in a facade for that private investment, but in the facility or project itself. We recently made changes to that to go to $60,000, so we nearly doubled the loan amount, and reduce the owner contribution to 10% with a 24-month look back. So if that property owner or business owner has made an investment in that property in the last 2 years in an amount equivalent to 10% of the loan that they're seeking, we'll consider that for the facade loan to grant. So a couple of reasons for that. One, the primary objective is not to see how much money a property owner can invest, but rather to see improvements to blighted conditions or improvements to facades for these businesses that are located in a low to moderate income area or that are serving a low to moderate income clientele. And so we wanted to encourage those kinds of investments, encourage those kinds of improvements to those facilities, those facades, if you will. And because the project is funded by CDBG, that means that we have to comply with all of the usual things similar to a public facility project. So that includes environmental review, a very extensive and intensive review process for staff, is environmental review record, a competitive bid process, compliance with Davis-Bacon, and the like. So it's a lot of staff time and money, if you will, if we were paying ourselves for those on an hourly rate. And we really just felt that, and we would rather get a bigger bang for that buck, bigger bang for that effort by increasing that loan amount and seeing more activity in that program, because it can be pretty daunting for the business owner to pursue.
Any interior build-out?
Not in this program, no. The CRA, though, which is generally, within our low moderate income areas of North Greenwood and Gateway, they have programs that support interior build-out. Certainly in our current CRA in the downtown, I don't believe any programs have yet been approved for the North Greenwood CRA, though that plan is now in place. I believe prior to Dr. Matthews' departure yesterday, no programs had come forward under that just yet, but I anticipate that it will.
The private match could go towards interior build-out.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Chuck, yeah. And then in October, we'll begin quarterly updates on our public services and facilities projects, and this is in direct response to the request made of this board at the last meeting. So we'll start that process in October. I'll mention that though we'll present that in October, the numbers will not be finalized for the fiscal year, which will have just ended at that point. It takes us a little bit to get the final bills in from our invoices in from our nonprofits to close out that process. But we'll begin reporting on it, so you'll get some information. 1003 West Avenue in North Greenwood, more familiarly known as Palmetto Park Apartments. This project, Hull Key Management, we did subordination kind of work with them a while back to support their efforts to rehab 179 units out there at Palmetto Park Apartments. Due to some cost overruns, remediation of asbestos that was unknown to them before, and a need for site security improvements, fencing, cameras, lighting, that kind of stuff, they approached us and Housing Finance Authority of Pinellas County for some additional funds. So HFA is coming forward with $500,000. City is coming forward with $500,000. That's being funded $174,000 by SHIP, and the balance of it is $326,000 funded by ARPA program. ARPA for us is Local Fiscal Recovery Funds, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. On Thursday, August 10th, we will officially be kicking off our citywide housing study with SB Friedman, the consultant on the project. It will take 3 to 4 months to complete, and will culminate in a consultant facilitated workshop with council. I'll invite you all to attend that with us. It won't be, because of the cost of the consultant, we won't have them in town for 2 meetings. So this is going to be delivered directly to council, and I'll invite you all to that workshop. But one of the things that we anticipate is that recommendations coming out of the study will provide guidance on a number of housing-related policies and goals, not just affordable and workforce housing, but market rate and other housing-related concerns that we have. So, as I mentioned, we've been working on compiling a list of all city and CRA-owned properties, so we'll be bringing that forward in September. And on kind of jumping all over the place. Sorry, this was late last night. On Friday, August 11th, Tampa Bay Neighborhood Housing Services, formerly known as Clearwater Neighborhood Housing Services, will be hosting a dedication of a new single-family home at 924 Seminole Street. So if any of you wish to participate, that's at 10:30 in the morning, and it is expected to last probably about 30 minutes. I'm sure Frank and his team would love to see you there if you're able to attend. And then finally, I wanted to share with you an update on ARPA Local Fiscal Recovery Funds. So we don't really talk about this, we haven't really talked about this much because it's one of those things that really isn't regulated. So, but I thought, wow, you know, we have these monies, we really should share with you what we're doing. Nicole? How dare So, ARPA local fiscal recovery funds, city received nearly $22.5 million. In the process to allocate these funds, the housing division received $3.3 million. And you can probably barely see that, so I'll zoom it in here a little bit. $3.3 million, that was, in November, we brought forward to council a plan for how we wish to expend those funds. You can see the different programs there that we made recommendation for and council supported. But I just want to give you an update of kind of how we are. We're not performing quite as well as Hometown Heroes is seemingly, but we're doing pretty well currently. So as you can see there, we've encumbered about 69% of that $3.3 million. We've dispersed 41% of that total allocation, with 28% of it still pending. Total number of projects is 67, but I wanted to draw your attention to this emergency grant program. So this has been really incredible for us. I won't say easy, but the community has responded really well to this. As you can see, 51 projects, a lot in the pipeline actually. This is 51 that we have expended the funds on. So 51 projects. This is up to $5,000 to address safety, prevent or address a deteriorating condition, or ADA improvements. So our loan programs are, you know, they begin at like $10,000 because of the work involved in doing a loan. And we realize there's this gap. We could address issues before they get to that level of expense. We can address some of these more urgent concerns for our homeowners with this emergency grant. This grant is also, we're able to utilize it in mobile home parks, which a lot of our programs preclude us from doing. So anybody here owning a home is eligible to apply for this emergency grant so long as they meet income qualifications under 120% AMI. And so we still have to go through and do income calls, you know, certify income, identify an eligible condition. Then the homeowner is charged with going out and finding a licensed contractor to do that work. And if required, you know, proof of permit, all those things, we communicate with that contractor. In some cases, we may have to provide a down payment. It really just kind of depends on what work is being done there. And then once that work is complete, we direct pay that contractor. So the money is not going into the hands of a homeowner who might decide to pocket it while continue to live with a deteriorating condition. It is, we're making sure that the project is complete and direct paying, and able to use our credit cards actually to direct pay those contractors. So they get paid very, very quickly. Homeowner gets some immediate concerns addressed, and this has been a really good program for us. I may suggest to city management at some point that they consider, once these funds have expired, that they consider contributing general fund revenues to this kind of effort, because I think there's a lot of benefit to be able to handle some of these concerns before they become larger issues. So the emergency grant program, highly successful. As you can see, residential development, though, there's a big chunk of money there. That $326,000 for Palmetto Park Apartments that I mentioned is coming out of ARPA. That's part of that encumbered amount. But other residential development, single-family construction, and otherwise, is we're utilizing some of these ARPA funds for them. Quite often, it's just supporting other funds that are being expended. So we're able to stretch dollars, sort of that layer leveraging again in order to get there. So we're moving very quickly. We're obligated to encumber and expend all of these funds by the end of 2026, encumber by the end of 24. Don't suspect that we'll have any issue encumbering by the end of 24 or expending by the end of 2026. Have you taken any questions about this or any of the other things in my report?
Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
Very welcome.
Board members to be heard. I'll start with final comments from my right.
I have a comment. I do want to thank everybody that was here today and participated. Thank you so much for being here.
I would like to say the same thing, but also thank you to Gabby, who is no longer on the board, but thank you for what she's done for the board.
Thank you.
Again, just reiterating, I love the comments and advice that you guys are giving us and things that you'd like us to see to do to better help the community, so I appreciate it.
Regarding rental assistance, there's a lot of agencies out there that can help, and they may be unknown to you, Ms. Davis and others, but I'll be happy to work with you to identify some of those services that are available. And I will say my experience with it is kind of a roundabout thing, especially when you call 211, they send you to someone else who can't help you, and it just goes back and forth. So to identify what's available and who provides it, I think would be helpful to the community, because it is confusing. I know that. And thank everybody for having me back. I appreciate it. I look forward to the future of Clearwater and affordable housing initiatives. I think it's a wonderful thing. You guys got a lot going on. It's super.
Thank you. And I echo what you say about rental assistance. The part of the difficulty is one agency may have dollars this month, but rental dollars can chew up a budget real quick. So dollars can be available one month and not the next. So keeping track of who has those dollars available, it can be a difficult task. Plus, a lot of agencies will put in sustainability requirements, which then limits the amount of assistance that can be provided. So it is difficult to work through that process.
And under rapid rehousing, it's only good for a certain period of time,
Yes.
and then what do you do at the end of the term? So it's a huge,
Yeah.
it's a huge initiative to overcome.
Our next NAHAB meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, September 12th, 2023. Our meeting will convene here in the council chambers at the main library immediately following the first meeting of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee meeting, which is scheduled for 9 a.m. We do not have an exact start time for our meeting, but we will adjourn the committee meeting and take maybe a 5-minute break and then move into our NAHAB meeting at that point. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.